Hello, everyone. Welcome to Libraries in Response, session 128. There it is. Building trust into the AI ecosystem. I hope. I think we're going to do that. I believe these fine people are working on that very thing, and I don't believe there's much that's more important right now than building trust into this technology, which is just, I don't know. Everybody's has their own ideas about it. You know, it's no big deal. It's the end of the world and everything in between. I'm closer to the end of the world spectrum. I wouldn't say I'm over there, but I think it's significant, a really significant development as it permeates every corner of the electronic world. And it seems like it's even assimilating the internet, if you will, which is just hard to conceive of that. But nevertheless, so we have Ellen and Richard and Denise with us. We'll get to them momentarily, but we thank them for being here. Up. That was the wrong slide. Okay, there we go. So, Libraries in Response, May 29th. We are the Gigabit Libraries Network. My name is Don Means. I'm the director there. And we are co-producing the Libraries in Response series with the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, IFLA, based in The Hague. IFLA is an international association of national libraries and national library associations. And it's an extraordinary global network for libraries. And we've been working with them on universal public access for years, and they're just great people. These are our sponsors and supporters we want to thank right up top because they're making this possible for us. New Jersey State Library, the Texas State Library and Archives Commission, Washington State Library, Mission Telecom, and the Delaware Division of Libraries, which is a new sponsor, and we welcome them all. We're just so pleased these state agencies are stepping up at a really difficult time for them. As you all may be aware, the federal agency that supports these state libraries has been shuttered. The Institute for Museum and Library Services has been closed, in effect. They've kept a couple of people there, but that's about it. And they have stopped all funding. The problem with that is, as you can imagine, it's always a problem to have your funding stopped, is that most of their budget, most of the federal agency's budget goes through the state libraries, and it represents half to 2/3 of their budgets. So there's a lot of scrambling going on right now, trying to figure out what this all means and is it going to stick? And even if it doesn't, it's just so disruptive. Let's try not to get too political about this, but it's hard not to. I think you'll agree. So Ellen and I've known each other for a number of years, but this is the first time I've been able to get her actually on her schedule. She's a very, very busy person, and for good reason. Richard, I've known Richard a number of years as well, back when he was a Googler in DC as the head of public policy for Google. You know, and that operation has come a long way since then, Richard. I'm just trying to think of, oh yeah, we do a little public policy, a little shop in DC, and now I don't know, but they must have a couple of buildings full of people now. And Denise is returning. Denise Holt is returning to talk more about the spatial web technologies and the new IEEE standard that has enabled this technology, which is just extraordinary. So a quick run through our kind of our meme parade, if you will. This is our image of kind of what we're about or what we think libraries are about, and that's responding to crises. And this is a Cal cartoon. Cal's the economist cartoonist and has given us permission to use this. We had him on, fantastic guy. So this is kind of the new four horsemen of the apocalypse. And these are all things that are communities are all facing, we're all facing this stuff. The Swiss Army knife of communities. This is our favorite meme for libraries. They do more things for more people than any other institution by far, by far. They have a problem with saying no. They don't say no very well. And so anybody asks them anything, they say yes, and then they take on somebody else. And so while there may be other institutions that, have a better knife or a better corkscrew, none of them have all of that together. And that's one of the great things about libraries, besides the fact that they stand for freedom of expression and right of private inquiry, which is in high demand these days. This is an image from 2008. It's a fire on Angel Island, which is in the middle of the San Francisco Bay. And this was going on. There was, a camper started a fire. In front of it, just that one night, was this ship, this sailboat, the Maltese Falcon, which is an immense thing. That's 200 feet tall masts, and the sails come out of the lateral spars, and it's all electronic. You can sail this thing. One person can sail this ship, 300-foot long ship, from their bedroom in Palo Alto. It's just a phenomenal piece of technology. And yet, against the backdrop of Earth burning, it's irresistible. This was actually in Sausalito that many years ago. So finishing here with this, libraries grounded in the principle that an informed, educated citizenry is a key to a free society, by the Secretary of State of Washington, which is where the state library is under. Could not agree more, and it's more important now than ever. We should probably bring this up. And so to the speakers, because we've got so much to cover today, I'm going to stop right now and introduce Ellen Goodman, professor at Rutgers University. Ellen is going to give us a regulatory legal view of how we can increase the reliability of this technology.
Okay, I wish I could do that, but I don't have the answers, but I can just give you a brief sort of survey of the landscape and leave with some questions. I put in the chat a recent piece that I wrote with Justin Hendricks at Tech Policy Press, which was a report on our convening of interdisciplinary experts on provenance and authentication. And I also included just one graphic that we had there, which is really what I want to talk about, which goes to this binary that's developing between synthetic and authentic content. It's a binary that I think is not particularly helpful, but it's what policymakers are kind of running with. And so I think I'll just describe a little bit of that work and where the policy, mostly in the States, policies lie with respect to synthetic content, and a little bit about the attempts to foster trust. And then I'll conclude with a couple of other thoughts. And I want to say, I think Don and I first started working together, talking together in the context of anchor institutions and broadband. And I think, and also Richard, spectrum and broadband. And I think like this notion of anchor institution, has never been more relevant. Okay, so synthetic content harms. One of the problems is that there's a lot of kind of confusion and sort of collapsing of different categories of harm. So I think they fall into three categories. There are dignitary harms from things like deep fake, and especially, non-consensual intimate imagery and CSAM. And those are not resolved with labels, right? Whether something is synthetic or not, the harm remains. There are economic harms from fraud, and those are just going to get a lot worse with agentic AI. And those, sort of labels and identification of the agent as a bot or the content as synthetic might help, but might not. And then the thing that I've mostly been focused on, and maybe what's of most interest to this group, are sort of the epistemic harms. And so, those are sort of confusion about reality and ground truth and what's real, but also model collapse as models get trained on synthetic content. And I know I've talked a little bit with the information sciences folks at Rutgers, and I know they're really working hard on kind of provenance, data provenance, as well as model output provenance as kind of an approach to dealing with this. In the states, what's happened with, so there are state laws now to deal with each of these, mostly the dignitary harm. So there are bans on NCII and on CSAM, and to some extent on deepfakes, although mostly the approach to deepfakes has been labeling, and especially these laws address deepfakes or other synthetic or manipulated content. All those terms are used in the context of election-related communications. And so, my position and a paper I've written, and also you can there's a lot of skepticism about these laws in this tech policy press piece and among the expert group. The problem with these state laws that essentially say, deep fakes in an election context have to be labeled, or synthetic media or manipulated media has to be labeled. The problem is that, it's not scalable. It's going to lead to lots of false positives and false negatives. And actually, this whole sort of concept of authentic versus synthetic, and this is what the graphic tries to get at, is really a false construct. And I think this false binary, obviously, synthetic content is on a spectrum, and we may well, if we're not there already, we're moving into a world in which most content is at least partially synthetic. And so therefore, labeling content as synthetic or manipulated is either meaningless, it's just information overload, or it's misleading. It may suggest that the information is not trustworthy and that authentic content is trustworthy, when, as we all know, lots of authentic content is not trustworthy. And so, it creates sort of, in an attempt to solve an epistemic problem, it may create new ones. And it's not all that helpful. So, I think, where does that leave us? I mean, these approaches that policymakers are entranced by, sort of a labeling approach, if they don't work, what does? The expert group was really quite keen on authentication technologies. So essentially, we'll have to assume that most content is partially synthetic. It may represent ground truth, or it may not. And so it becomes all the more important to have authentication of information or people when it's important. And so not all the time, but when it's important. And so therefore, robust authentication technologies and methods become really important for trust. The experts who work on this essentially said there just aren't enough people working on this. It's not very well funded, and God knows what's happening to that now, but it's not well funded, and it's not really that sexy in PhD programs to do content authentication. And so that's a real problem. And so, like, if we're going to rely on authentication, the science and the social science around that and the policy around that has to get much more robust. And I suspect there is a role that information science in general and libraries can play in this. The other things that I wanted to mention that are going on in the policy space where libraries, I think are really important is, one, a kind of effort. There was an effort at the federal level called the NARE, the National AI Research Resource, that is, before January 20th, had pilots going. I don't know what the status of those are now. There really was bipartisan support for robustly funding this, which essentially, it's in recognition of the fact that AI is, unlike any other technology, major technology we've had, is completely growing up in private, and there really isn't a public funding or public component to it. So it's an attempt to create that so that there is public compute and public data. Obviously, libraries would be important in this. I don't know where that stands at the federal level, but in the meantime, states are sort of creating state NARES. I know there's an Empire AI in New York, and I think there are other efforts to do this. And so I think that's a place where I'm not quite sure what libraries' role is, but I think that's a place to look for. And then the last thing I'll just conclude with is the one I started with, which was anchor institutions. We in education are looking at a complete disruption of everything we do and how we teach, and inside out and upside down classrooms and experiential learning, and everyone's walking around saying touch grass and convene in person, and this kind of understanding that the ways we have circulated, processed, developed knowledge and cognitive work, and where we send our students out in the world, the work that we think that they will have, all of that is being disrupted. And so, I really think that there's a place for anchor institutions to kind of work with other epistemic institutions like universities to kind of change what roles we play and how we convene people. And that's it. Thank you.
Bravo. Couldn't agree more about all of that. Especially the last part about libraries playing a role in this public AI. We've talked about that. We're participating with a group called the Public AI Network. It's an open sort of global initiative, and they're tracking these different kinds of efforts everywhere. And they see libraries as an instantiation of their very concept of a public good, accessible, free, and open to everyone. So we're involved in that. And I think it's hard to imagine how it's going to actually work out, but something needs to happen other than just leaving it to Elon and Zuckerberg, et cetera. A question for Ellen, Denise, Richard. You read your email, right? I said you had.
Yeah. And hey, Ellen, and I know we talked a bit about potentially things happening in Pennsylvania. I mean, do you see other states stepping up? You noted this, these various labeling laws. Are there any other ideas that are circulating in the states that are worth our consideration? You talked about the authentication technologies and but is there anything at a state level where anybody involved here today, frankly, from those states could weigh in and say, hey, I approve of, or, I support this particular approach towards AI?
I don't know. I mean, there's the fiduciary idea.
Never heard of that. Yeah, it's crazy.
I mean, I'm there. I think I'm very impressed with what's happening in the states around sort of AI procurement and states kind of like trying to take on, they're looking only to themselves to try to be aggressive about rolling out AI where it makes sense, but also about trying to have guardrails.
Yeah, procurement's a great one, by the way, because I feel like that's where you're not directly regulating, you're just simply putting in place requirements for how taxpayer money is going to be spent. And but obviously has its own ways of influencing the technology builds. Yep.
All right. So Denise, any question for Ellen right now, or?
Well, I have some good news.
Okay.
So, one of the things that is underway right now is going to solve a lot of the issues that you're describing as far as around the guardrails around AI and the security around the use of data and our particular sovereignty around our own data and kind of this ownership aspect of data to where, so let me back up. There's a new protocol layer coming on top of HTTP and HTML for the internet. It's a global standard. It's been approved by the IEEE. And we're going to start seeing implementation throughout the rest of this year. So within the next year, 2 years, we're going to start to see the security layer come across our internet because it's about to expand into spatial domains to where it, it becomes this universal domain graph of entities, people, places, things, nested spaces, and it's all programmable. So all the interrelationships between everything, permissions and credentials can be programmed into everything. And what it does is it takes us from this library of pages of the internet right now with web domains, where all the transactions take place under the umbrella of whoever owns that web domain, to where now transactions are at every touch point between entities. So permissions and ownership and all kinds of context around interrelationships between things and spaces can now be programmable. So there will still be deep fakes, but it'll be very clear that that's what it is, right? Because the origin will be obvious, if that makes
Denise,
sense.
can you just say more about that? So what will the user interface look like?
Well,
with
actually,
respect-
that's Denise's. Denise, you're
Yeah.
stealing thunder here. That's your presentation, right?
Oh wait,
stealing thunder.
we'll roll that out slowly.
All right.
Wait, before
we'll
we
get-
get to Denise, let me answer this question from Mark in Mississippi. Yeah, so the big beautiful bill does have a moratorium on state AI regulation. Now, I mean, I also wrote a short piece about that. I think it's unconstitutional. We'll see if it, not that maybe that won't matter, but I don't know if it will stay in the Senate bill, but it also has some loopholes in it where, if the state law is actually fostering AI, but it has some guardrails in it, I think actually that slips through the moratorium. But yes, that is an issue.
Okay. Richard.
Yes, sir.
Welcome back. Tell us
Thank you.
what's going on with GLIA.
Yes, let me hopefully get my screen here so you all can see something. Share slideshow. Okay, do y'all see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'll just run through a couple of quick slides because I think this is hopefully more of a conversation than not. So I think what ties Ellen and Denise and I together, Ellen's telling us sort of what's happening today and some potential steps to make things better. Denise is going to talk about these new technologies, including this new protocol layer IEEE has endorsed, which is awesome. And I'm here to talk about the sometimes the missing piece, as I call it, which is the governance layer, which is to say, how do we ensure that there are ways that we can trust the entities and now increasingly the AI platforms and agents that are going to be swirling in our lives very shortly? Where can we, and since the theme here is trust, I had this a very humble suggestion around what I call net fiduciaries. So let me just go through it really quickly. The current web, of course, we don't have trust for the most part. It's what I call the surveillance, extraction, analysis, and manipulation economy. Call it SEAMS. I wrote a book about that, came out last fall. It's at a large monopoly bookseller online near you. The idea here is, how do we supplant this? How do we make something better? Because if we introduce AI on top of this current platform, then particularly the notion of manipulation becomes that much more problematic, right? Today, it's bad enough that they're just selling us, trying to put ads in front of us we don't want to see. Tomorrow, it's going to be, how can they find ways to influence our behaviors using AI, advanced algorithmic technologies, biometrics, all of that, right? So I think that's where things really become hugely problematic for us. And so my suggestion is what I call GliaNet. Glia is the ancient Greek word for glue. And the idea of trust is the social glue. We need more of that, particularly on the web. And it's a four-layered approach, starting with the governance layer of what I call net fiduciaries, markets that are based on willing sellers and buyers, not just the one-sided approaches we see on the platforms today. Technology like authentic personal agents, not the double agents, as Bruce Schneier calls them, that are being promulgated and pushed in our faces by the larger now AI platform companies, and then some public policy elements to make this all fit together. What's a net fiduciary? Well, it's going back to the common law and taking some lessons around how, when we've had power asymmetries going back hundreds of years now, recognized by society, addressed by having duties of care and loyalty between the entity that holds that power and the rest of us. So we have applied it obviously to the medical profession, the legal profession, some financial sectors. Interestingly, libraries, and we've talked about this, and I think in one of our previous sessions, librarians have a fiduciary duty towards their patrons, among other things, not to share records of what people have been researching or checking out from the library. That came into focus post 9/11 when the libraries were very vigilant in protecting the privacy of their patrons. So the idea here is to take that notion from these other centuries and bring it into the 21st century around personal AI, personal data, but increasingly around AI and our other online interactions. I put together what I call the PEP model, which breaks down the common law fiduciary duties into the basic one, duty of care, which is a no harm standard we're pretty familiar with, which basically means protect me, offer me safeguards for my data, for example. The enhanced function, which is fidelity, meaning no conflicts of interest, act as a mediator for me. And then the promote function, which is the highest standard, to promote my best interests, have loyalty towards me as an advocate. And this is a broad brush attempt to take those duties and apply them into the 21st century web technology space. This is one of the sort of model configurations to think about right now today. Again, whether you're OpenAI, Meta, Google, or a growing number of entities, they all want their AI agents to become ours, and for us to assume that they are acting in our best interest, when of course they're not. They're serving the shareholder values of the underlying platforms. And so the notion here is to have a net fiduciary, an entity that is yours, an entity which could be either a for-profit sector. So I'm working with a bunch of companies in a coalition who are building out the technology. Could be a nonprofit, and it could be something like a library, which we've talked about again in previous sessions here. The notion of anchor institutions stepping into this role, I think, could be hugely important to protect the interests of people in local communities. But whoever that entity is, they abide by these duties of care and loyalty. And then you have your own agent, this personal AI that represents you and interacts directly with what I call the institutional AI agents. Again, the ones that want to claim that they're acting on our behalf, but they really are not. This is just a little chart that tries to show how you connect this notion of relationship and capabilities. You all remember Clippy from the late 90s, Microsoft. We all loved Clippy because he basically did nothing, but he was actually kind of rather annoying. He kept popping up for no reason on our screens. Those of you who remember, who've been around long enough to remember that. Clippy was harmless, but therefore didn't really do a whole lot that could harm us. As we move now into this world increasingly towards autonomous agents, or at least semi-autonomous agents, their capabilities are getting that much more powerful. I would submit then the relationship we have with these agents should also be increasing. So we're no longer a mere user. We should be expecting and in fact demanding duties of care and ultimately loyalty between ourselves and these agents. As the power grows, so therefore should be that these relationships. This alliance of companies that I've put together, we have 22 of them, including Consumer Reports. Some of them are building AI agents today, again, to represent us using small language model technology, not the large language models. And these are for-profit companies who see being a net fiduciary in the world, not just as the ethical thing to do, but as a market differentiator to separate yourself out from all of I think the increasing dross that's going to be coming at us from the AI agents world in particular. And by gaining more trust and support with and relationships with your customers or patrons or clients, building that authentic relationship means they will willingly share more of themselves, which creates a positive feedback loop between you and the folks you're working with, and ultimately makes for a successful market. Again, not just the ethical thing to do, but a good market approach. This is a very convoluted chart. Just shows where we are. We're building out this community of practice. We're setting up an incubator, ultimately moving towards a world where we might actually have net fiduciaries as a sector or even a profession that people can opt into, become, and serve the interests of the people they work with. Again, much like doctors or lawyers, but now for your web, online interactions, your data, and all of your algorithmic capabilities as well. And this is just a little ecosystem mapping of all the various companies in the alliance at the applications and content layers, and further down, even helpful places at the bottom, which is doing a smart city build in a bunch of places around the country where passersby have an ability to interact with the environment, understand what's happening with all the sensors and cameras and devices that are trained on them, and give them more agency in those situations. So with that, I thank you all very much.
Great, Richard. Fortunately, we're recording this, and so people will have a chance to go back and hit the pause button as they go through your presentation.
I'm much more interested to hear what Denise has to say, so I was trying to make it as quick as I could.
No, it was great, and and a lot of that I've seen before, but you've developed a lot of new ideas, concepts, and relationships. It's really impressive. Anything for Richard, Denise, Ellen?
Well, I'm curious, Richard, you seemed interested in procurement, and is there a way that you can see public entities, states or cities, kind of, I mean, are they in your coalition, or could they commit to this or require this for their own agents?
Yeah, it's a great question. I know some people in California where I reside. I'm also close to Phil Weiser, who's the Attorney General in Colorado. He's actually a friend of mine. You know him as well, of course, Ellen. Running for governor. Hope he wins. But he and I have had these conversations. What can the states do, particularly in this era where we may not expect very much from our federal government, or even worse, expect things like 10-year moratoria? I think procurement's a fascinating one because, again, it's hard for me to see how anything that the federal government can do could prevent a state from putting conditions around its procurement powers, right, as a state entity. So he and I have talked about, like, yeah, maybe you can, for example, say we will not deal with companies unless they have some sort of fiduciary duties of care and or loyalty towards the people who use their technologies. Another idea was, now we're going to have increasingly AI agents all over the place claiming to represent us. So you can imagine waking up one morning and there's a, congratulations message on your laptop. You just won that Explorer 150B. And so how to do that? Well, your agent last week, you clicked that box that said, oh, I agreed this agent can now go represent me and go buy me a car. I think we're going to see tons of that, right? Fraud where the agents claim to act on our behalf. And so he and I have talked about, well, what if we had a situation where the states could say, you know what, we will not recognize any kind of interaction by an agent on behalf of somebody unless there's an underlying trusted third party, whether it's fiduciary based or something else, but at least there's some trust level there so you're basically flipping the liability and risk onto those who want to impose them on us as consumers. So I think there's a number of things that can happen there that I think can be pretty helpful.
What's astonishing to me is with all the conversations going on about AI and what it can do, what it won't do, all that, there's so little conversation about trusting it. And yet, the whole thing collapses if we don't have it.
Well, there's also an issue right now with the so-called agents that are coming from the classical AI deep learning sphere, because they're not trusted agents. They have no ability for causal reasoning. And without that, you will never have trusted agents. And, and it's one of the things that I'm about to talk about, during my session is, this next evolution of AI that's coming.
Outside the Valley Library and left that on online.
Sorry about that. Somebody needs to mute. Excuse me, Denise.
Look at that. I just called
It's
that.
Beverly. It looks like it's Beverly.
And then put
Beverly. I wish I could mute Beverly, but maybe she's solved it. Sorry, Denise. Continue.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. So,
Okay,
there is an evolution of autonomous intelligence that's coming that's based on active inference, and it's a neuroscience approach to AI. And this AI does have the ability for causal reasoning. But if we're talking about what we currently see in agents, it'll never happen. You will never have trusted agents out of that because they might recognize patterns, but they struggle with conceptual understanding. And they recognize correlations, but they don't understand relationships. And they recognize patterns, but don't understand the underlying meaning. So without that, you won't be able to have agents who are trusted fiduciaries. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we're basically entering the worst world, which is, as you say, they can't truly be operating on our behalf. They're only operating based as stochastic parrots on what they've been trained on, the patterns that, and those platforms have a simple imperative: make as much money as you can. So that is, so without any ability to have that kind of more autonomous approach, as you're saying, that is happening. Hopefully will be coming out. We're not going to be in that world. We're
Certainly,
going to be a world where they're
certainly
going to
makes the
claim
case
the
for a
exact
third
record.
party.
What's that?
It certainly makes the case for a third party,
Yeah,
a
I think
human
so.
maybe,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
maybe not. Maybe not humans are the only way to assure trust in these transactions and interactions. Denise, you clearly are ready to go with what it is that you wanted to talk about today. This based on this new IEEE standard, which is so rare these things happen, especially on something of this scale. So why don't you start with that and tell us what you're up to in the limited time that we have?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned before, this new global standard for the internet, the Spatial Web Protocol, which is the protocol itself is called Hyperspace Transaction Protocol, and the programming language for it is called Hyperspace Modeling Language. And it's the P2874 working group with the IEEE, and this standard's been in development for the last 5 years. And it was just voted for approval within the working group last summer, and it was just voted and ratified with the IEEE just a few weeks ago. So we're going to start to finally see the implementation about this. I've been writing about it for the last 3 years because to me, it is one of the most exciting things that is about to happen. Not only is our internet about to expand exponentially in size, because now every entity, every person, place, or thing in any space and nested spaces are locatable, identifiable within a digital twin of basically the Earth, this universal domain graph that will be built out with the location of all of the things and the nested spaces. It will become digital twins of everything. And there's a couple of really exciting things that are going to come out of this. One of them is it will enable this intelligence layer that is embedded within the network. It enables this new type of AI called active inference, which is based on Bayesian mechanics, which mimics the way biological intelligence works, right? And it doesn't have to be tethered to a giant database. It's not processing queries by just, combing through static data to, recognize patterns and spit out an output that seems appropriate, but appropriate and accurate are two different things. And so this enables the distribution of these agents throughout networks. So they can process at the edge, they can learn from their environment, from wherever they are within the network, and they learn in the same way as biological intelligence, taking in sensory data, measuring it against their own understanding of reality up until that point. So they're self-modeling, right? So they actually are continually learning in the same way that we as humans are continually learning, right? And the way they learn about their environment, they can also learn from each other. So you're going to have this shared collective intelligence layer within the network that's actually based on real live data that is ever evolving in the moment. So this is going to be trusted intelligence. And there's this other side of a hyperspace transaction protocol that has a security layer baked in. And it's kind of what I was describing a few moments ago with now transactions can be at every touch point between any node within the network, right? Because the nodes, instead of the nodes just being web domains, right, where all of the transactions are taking place under one node. So whoever owns that node owns that data, what's happening with it, and controls it, right? So now everything becomes a node in the network. So transactions are at every touch point. It enables this zero trust architecture because now you have all these various confirmations within the network of whether things are true or not. And it's powered by this intelligence. And you can bake in required permissions or credentials because this is a spatial and time dimension, you can bake in permissions on, or you can bake in expirations on permissions, right? So it's going to enable a lot more power over data and data access. It's going to have a lot of the protections that we see with blockchain and distributed ledger technology, as far as, immutable ledgers that are, inherently prevent fraud. So, there's a lot of security coming to our internet that is just missing and has been missing since its inception, because security was an afterthought for the World Wide Web. So right now, we're trying to use all these emerging technologies in the most unsecured environments. So that's about to shift and change. So it will offer a lot more protection for people and our data and what happens to it.
How will this be implemented?
It'll be implemented. What do you mean?
Who will use it? How will it be entered into systems?
Well, it'll through the programming language, right? So right now we have all of these various protocols that have been in development as well, whether it's through the Digital Twin Consortium or, the Web3 Consortium, or, entities that have to do with, all of these smart technologies and emerging technologies, whether it's IoT or AR or VR or whatever. And what HSML does is it enables the interoperability of all of these technologies through a singular programming language. So what we're going to see is this digital twinning, this programming of this universal domain graph. So there will be a domain registry where people will register a node in the network, whether it's a space and entities within that space, or, whatever it is. And as this universal domain graph builds out and people are building agents within it, these active inference agents as applications, it will all start to come together, filling out this universal domain graph that just basically extends the capabilities of the internet. So in the same way as when the World Wide Web started, right? And then what did that do? That took us from TCP/IP, where we could send messages from computer to computer, right, through email, to where all of a sudden, oh, I can build a website. I can attract people to my property within this network, right? So that's what's going to happen with this, is you're able to now designate these things in this spatial network, and then the programming language will be able to program all the aspects about them, right? It'll be able to link agents together as applications, and it'll be able to bake in all of the context and interrelationship information, attributes, things that are tracked over time within all of that spatial programming.
Astounding. Ellen, anything come to mind?
Well, I guess, Denise, let me ask you, if you were red teaming this, like, tell us the fail points, or the, the worst that could happen.
Oh, God. Well, I mean, here's the thing. With everything, as it starts to, build out into the public sector, you start to see people, kicking it around and finding the vulnerabilities. So we're going to see that happen as well. But from what I see with the protocol itself and the way that this has been assembled over the last 5 years, it has been assembled with the goal in mind to solve the main problems that we have within the World Wide Web, which is like hacking, tracking, and faking, right? So we're already starting from a really good point for security, and the guiding principles of the spatial web, you've got hyperspace, the spatiality. ownership, where users can own their data and control what happens to their data. There's security baked in with the data collection, the transmission, interactions and transactions between virtual and physical objects, right? There's privacy, individual control, and trust and security that utilize cryptographically secured and decentrally stored digital identities, right? And then trust is baked in, real-time permission-driven validation. It's going to provide a level of interoperability we've never seen before because of this digital twin aspect. People can come together in this digital twin simulation environment with assets that it doesn't matter what technology they use to build these assets. They're able to come together in this simulated environment for interoperability. That's going to really enhance a lot of the way we deal with each other, business to business and team to team globally.
Wow.
And so,
Sorry. Richard, anything?
Yeah. I'm fascinated in sort of the commercial side, adoption and implementation of this. I've seen a company Versus, I think you're familiar with them as well. I think they're the one I've seen out there sort of talking about it. I think their CEO has been a very big fan. I think they're looking to adopt it and put it in as part of their business. Are there other companies you're aware of that are doing that? And then also, I mean, maybe in a larger sense, is this the kind of thing that the larger platform companies will adopt, embrace? Or is this something that you believe might actually they would push back against or even try to find ways to undermine because it goes against sort of their current dominance?
right, it goes against the business model.
Yeah. So have
Yeah.
you seen signs either of any initial interest by the platform companies one way or the other in what's happened with the adoption of the protocol?
So here's the thing. The reason those companies gained the scale of business that they have is because of the network effect of the World Wide Web, right?
Yeah.
And so what you're going to see, so they're already part of the internet. This is still the internet. This is just an expansion, the new capabilities of the internet. And I think if we look at what we've seen with the evolution of the internet, a lot of the big tech companies, like the Googles and Amazons and whatnot, they took off with the World Wide Web because websites gave them the ability to scale in a way that you couldn't with brick and mortar. And it really comes down to Metcalfe's law, right? So, the value of a network is the square of the number of nodes, right? The number of nodes is about to exponentially expand. And what we saw with going from just the World Wide Web into mobile is the scale then became even larger, right? And so then you had social media really started to scale and take off with mobile, not, even more so than what they were experiencing with the World Wide Web alone. And so now we have this expanded capability into spatial domains. So they're all going to take part in it. And if you look at what happened with mobile, Apple came out first with the iPhone, right? And the App Store. Google Maps was one of the first apps, even though it was Apple. A couple of years later, they launched Android and the and their own app store. But they didn't miss out being a part of that expansion in the very beginning because of the value of it. So I think we're going to see the same thing happen. We're going to see these big tech companies starting to realize there's an advantage here. How do we play? How do we play in this new space? Now, the other aspect of it is you have this intelligence layer within the network that is going to, and this level of interoperability that's going to bring all of these emerging technologies to life that have all been largely siloed, right? The biggest problem between AR, VR, IoT, everything else has been the lack of interoperability. And HSML becomes this common language for all these technologies to now converge across the internet. And that's going to bring to life this augmented reality existence that we've all kind of envisioned, but the framework hasn't been there. This is the framework for that. So we're about to expand into a technological realm that we've really thought about for a long time, but haven't been able to. So there's really no stopping it.
Oh, so I've heard that one before. There, what's the impact on, you're talking about, a twin of everything. You're talking about, like every rock has an IP address or something like that. What does that do to the total amount of data that has to be maintained in the whole world of electrification of all this data and the maintenance of it? That's been a huge problem, right? With the expansion of the explosion of AI as these data centers, unsustainable as they are now.
Well, first of all, the you're not going to program a rock unless there's a reason to.
I've got a rock. I
Right.
like it. I want to know where it is. What it's doing.
You might have a special rock that you want to have included in.
Well, there's a lot of everything you're talking
Yeah,
about.
but I hear what you're saying, and here's one of the wonderful aspects of this is that these active inference agents, because they're not tethered to a giant database. Right now, one of the problems with AI is that you have to have all the training data within a huge database powered by these super powered GPUs so that they can process all of the queries and the number of queries that are coming into that hub, right? And that takes an enormous amount of data because these queries have to be processed, like they have to run through all of the neural nets of all of the training data to find the patterns and be able to spit out something that seems appropriate. These active inference agents, because they operate according to biological intelligence, they are super energy efficient in the same way that the human brain is energy efficient. So they're not processing through a bunch of information that is not necessary, right? They're using whatever information they need to process in the moment. And I'll back up a second and explain kind of how this learning occurs. If you think of how we learn as humans, even from the time we're born as we grow, up through adulthood and specialized intelligences and everything else, we're in this process of continually modeling our understanding of the world, of reality, of how things work. And so with every new encounter, we're testing the world, we're taking in all of this new data. It's why toddlers put everything in their mouth. They're taking in sensory data. They're trying to find out about the world so that they can establish this model of understanding, right? That model of understanding, once it's there, you don't need to keep processing that, right? It's building and establishing. And what's happening with every new encounter of learning is you're taking in new data and you're either updating your model or confirming your model, right? But it's that process of learning. So it's very energy efficient and it just continues to grow in in knowledge. And so these agents will be able to grow and learn from their environment, whatever their purpose is, whatever their goals are, and then also share that information with each other and learn from each other in that same way. And so it's this extremely energy efficient way of learning, and it happens throughout the network. So the processing happens on edge devices, right? Your laptop, your phone, these devices that are already in use, and it doesn't require super powered processing.
Right. Right. It's mind-blowing, actually. The the idea that IEEE would adopt this against the wishes of the big tech companies defies belief to my thinking. They would have been involved in this from the get-go, right?
Well, I think the difference though, Don, I mean, IEEE adopts lots of standards, right? The question is, will it be implemented in the marketplace, right? So that's where the rubber hits the road, as it were. So it's available now. People can start to, put it in their systems and utilize it, build models, business models around it, which is awesome. But now this is also the point where the big guys can step in and say, yeah, you know what, this may not be in our best interest. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying I'm worried as a former longtime Google lawyer that they will see this more as a threat than as an opportunity. The mobile web was a little bit different because we're sort of taking the existing web and extending it. This is in a way sort of supplanting the web over the existing internet, infrastructure in ways that I think really could challenge their predominance, everything moving to the edge, empowering users in ways that may not be in the best interests of the big companies. So that's just my concern.
Well, so and I understand that, I think that we're likely to see a lot of Blockbuster and Kodak moments too, because it's not just about the marketplace and, what big tech companies can do with this technology. This technology is going to offer so much good for humanity and human good that it won't not move forward. And the reason I say that is because it enables this secure guardrailed AI intelligence layer that is absolutely necessary. If you listen to what Ellen has been sharing with us today, we have to have that type of AI and that type of security around AI if we're going to move forward. And it also preserves, because the spatial web enables this ability for polycentric governance, this AIS rating system, this autonomous intelligent system rating system, because we're going to have all different types of AIs that have all different levels of capabilities. And how do you know what level of trust to give to each type of system? So we have to have this rating system. It's built into the spatial web protocol. And it because of this digital twin simulation that's powered by AI, we're going to be able to solve a lot of these issues that we've had with climate, with just all kinds of scientific research benefits, different things like that. There are already entities right now that are compiling all of the various scientific databases and bringing them together, because you can take all of these various data sources and bring them together for powered intelligence through simulations across networks. And you've never been able to do that before. So we'll be able, and because this is intelligence enabled, you can run as many simulations simultaneously as possible. These AI agents are able to understand complex systems on a local level as well as a global level and all scales in between, and monitor those systems simultaneously. So there's going to be so much advantage to this system that it won't not move forward. So if there are tech companies that are trying so hard to hold on to their business model and, not move forward with this, they'll be left behind. And we've seen that before historically with tech companies.
Yeah. Okay, I think we'll take that as your final statement on the issue today, but not the end of the conversation for sure. Ellen, final word. We're coming up on an hour.
My mind is still blown by Denise's presentation, so I'm still processing it. Just great to be here, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Richard?
Yeah, mind blown as well. I guess my only small caveat is we need a human in the loop somewhere that we can trust ultimately. I'm always a little bit concerned about what I call tech optimism, which is the technology solves all problems. It solves many problems, but at the same time, we need to be able, as ordinary people, to trust the other people and institutions and entities in our lives who are putting that amazing, technology in place. So whether it's this fiduciary approach I'm pushing or others, I think we need to find trust somewhere as a human element to combine with the amazing tech.
One of the places we find it is in self-interest. Like we're driving down the road and we trust the people to stay on the other side. We don't think about it as trust, but it totally is. And that's because we understand intuitively, if they don't, if we don't, we'll all not make it. Your remark comparing this technology to biological systems resonates with something I heard recently on a talk at Long Now, this group in the Bay Area by Benjamin Bratton of the Antikythera. I'm putting it in the chat right now, and it's really comprehensive in that it's synthetic intelligence, it's natural intelligence, it's human intelligence, all as one intelligence, and how that's evolving and where we are as he says, a Copernican moment. Thank you, Ellen. Great to be here. Denise, I know you've got to run too. You've got something right now. So thank you again for being here. Good to see you as ever. And
Thank you, Don.
Always good to follow your progress. And I can't wait for the first conference of GliaNet.
Yeah, maybe it'll be GliaNet partnering on the spatial web and the role of HSML to empower all of us over the tech overlord.
You've been talking about the web since the beginning, Richard. You were really a leader in helping us understand the web itself and its impact on us. So thank you for
Glad
all
to
of
be
that.
here. Thanks, Don. Good to see you, Denise.
Yeah, really nice to meet you, Richard. I mean, we've spoken through email, but it's really nice to put a face to the name. And
there we go. Okay.
Thanks
Well,
to everybody else here who came and listened to us. Yeah, we appreciate it.
this was a good one. We'll have the recording up in a day or so, and it'll be worth going back to try to get through this again in slow motion. All right.
thanks
Good
a lot,
to see you.
Don.
Thanks for coming. We'll sign
Thanks,
off.
everybody.
Courage.